Hey everyone, I'm Lucas Hall from Landlordology and Cozy, and I'm super excited to be here with you today. This is the inaugural event for us. It's going to be mostly Q&A about tenant screening and landlording. Now, if you've been with us in the past, you're familiar with our webinars. They're free. They're usually like an hour to an hour and a half long, and they go really deep into one topic. So we've done tenant screening webinars, we've done rent collection webinars, we've done presentations on Airbnb. We've done a lot of things. Now we always do Q&A at the end, and what ends up happening is the presentation is like an hour, and then the Q&A is like another hour sometimes. And it's some of my favorite parts of the whole presentation is with the interaction and the questions that happen afterwards. So what we did is we thought, well, let's just do a whole webinar of Q&A. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And this is an opportunity for you to ask us and me any question you want about landlording or tenant screening, and I will do my best to answer it. So the way this works is on the right-hand side, there's a little question and answer box. Go ahead and type in any question you have now or as we go through a little presentation. I'm going to do maybe about 15 minutes of just basic tenant screening, best practices, and it's kind of like the highlights of my bigger presentation all crammed into 15 minutes. That way, maybe it'll give us some topics to discuss and ask questions about. So I hope you learned something from that, and I hope that we have a great time doing the Q&A. I've scheduled about 45 minutes for this, and I'm happy to stick with you longer if there's more questions, and then you can always email us later too. So let's get this party started. I'm super excited. First and foremost, I am Lucas Hall. I'm a project management professional, which is a IT certification. It actually just means that I can get stuff done and I can work on projects and make sure that they complete on time and within budget. But that's been my career. I've actually been a landlord for over 10 years, and I have 5 properties in 3 states with about 17 residents. Before really, like while I was building up my landlording portfolio or my rental properties, I was working as an IT consultant for some of the largest agencies, including DoD, in the federal government, and helping them do amazing things like build missiles, for one, audit some of the largest national banks in the country, for another. So it's really fun stuff. But as I grew in my portfolio, I decided to create a website called Landlordology, and that's probably how you came here today. Landlordology just was built out of the need to build a community around the art of landlording and making everybody more profitable and more ethical and trying to raise the quality of landlord and tenant in this country, raising that standard. And it caught on very quickly. Landlordology eventually became part of Cozy, which makes amazing software for landlords and property managers, and that too is free. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But I work at Cozy now, and Cozy is the sponsor and the provider of these webinars, and it's just part of our portfolio. So we're excited you're here, and I'm excited to be able to do this for a living and to be able to just educate and pass on information. I do have another person with me on the line. Her name is Maggie, and Maggie also works at Cozy, and she is our customer success manager. She is actually going to be helping me today kind of filter through the questions and feed it so that we can get as much done as possible and answer everybody's questions. Maggie, do you want to say hi?
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
Thanks.
I'll be reading your questions and fielding them to Lucas.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, this is great. Okay, so this is landlordology. If you did come from it, you're well aware from it, well aware of it. But if you didn't, check this out. It's landlordology.com. It's where we post all of the different um, events that we do, like these webinars, but also has a ton of other information like state law resources, landlord guides, which are definitive, full length, educational resources that are completely free. So check them out. It's certainly a huge resource. It reaches about 2.5 million people a year and is able to help them be better and more profitable. This whole webinar and Landlordology are brought to you by Cozy. Cozy is free, modern property management software, and I use it for my own businesses. I use it for my properties. I manage all my own properties, and I would use it even if I didn't work at Cozy. It's really amazing. It does everything that you could want a property management tool to do, and it just does it well. It does it seamlessly, and it does it for free. So you really can't get any better than that. I actually had some tenants who were leaving uh, or they're leaving soon in June, and they were looking for a new place, and they said, "Well, hey, how do I find another landlord that uses Cozy? Because I don't want to stop using Cozy as a tenant." I was like, "Well, I don't know how to help you there, but we could try to figure something out." But really, they were trying to find properties with landlords using Cozy rather than just the property itself. So I we never expected that to be a benefit, but it's certainly paying off that way. So both ends of the spectrum really love to use it. What we do at Cozy, or what we've done at Cozy, is we've actually grown tremendously. We have over 50,000 managers in the United States using us in 6,000 cities and 10,000 zip codes. So essentially, Cozy is everywhere. It's used in every major city. It's used by an incredible amount of people, and then even more tenants than managers. So really, it's just a full services amazing resource. Check it out. It's completely free. What we do are four main things. One, marketing. So we'll help you list your properties and syndicate them to realtor.com and doorsteps and a couple other listing sites. But we'll give you an amazing little web page for each of your properties to collect those online rental applications. When you do collect applicants, then you can screen them, and you can screen them for free. Your applicant will have to pay for pay for a credit report and a background check if you want to get that, or you could just get the application, and that's truly free for both of you. But I'll show you examples of those later. Those are just beautiful and easy to read. When you do find tenants, you can dump them into online rent payments. And that's my favorite part because you can sit there on your couch and you can watch Netflix or reruns or whatever, and you'll get a little alert on your phone that says like, "Hey, rent's on the way," or "Hey, it's being deposited." And there's no greater feeling in the world to know that you just have this passive income rolling in and you didn't have to get off the couch. Lastly, we do education, and that's where landlordology comes in. It's truly free. We're just concerned about helping you run your business better, helping you succeed. So, a quick little story. This is a mountain. This is the Matterhorn. It's in Switzerland. It's actually borderline Switzerland, Italy. But I had a tenant a few weeks ago who was, or I should say, an applicant who was applying to my property, and she saw it, but all her roommates were out of town or out of state or whatever. And she's like, "Hey guys, we really got to move on this place. I think it's going to be gone if we don't hurry up and apply." And so she contacted one of her tenants, and the tenant was actually hiking the Matterhorn and was able to apply to rent my place on her phone while hiking the Matterhorn from a different country, right? So that's just the power of new technology. That's the power of Cozy. You can get applicants from the Matterhorn overnight, and they can submit credit reports and background checks without really having to do anything difficult. So anyway, that was a cool story. That was really neat. Shows you the power of it. But let's get back to the bread and meat and potatoes. I was going to say bread and butter, but let's get to the meat and potatoes. This is screening basics. I'm going to go through a couple different things about tenant screening. That's primarily what we're focused on, but feel free to ask any questions you want about anything related to landlording, or maybe a situation that you're in, today. Maybe you're dealing with applicants. I know spring is like the busy season for property managers like you and me. And so maybe you've got a situation where you're screening an applicant and you don't know what to do. You can type that in there. I will do my best to answer all of the questions to the best of my knowledge, but I should preface this with saying that I am not a lawyer. Please don't think that this is legal advice, and please take this as just friendly advice from an experienced landlord who just really wants to help. So take it as you will, but don't think it's legal advice. Okay, so let's talk about screening basics. Let's talk about the things that make it possible for you to pick out tenants. There are a couple things, essential things, that if this is all you remember from this entire presentation, I would say this is what you need to focus on. When you're screening a tenant, when somebody comes through, they really only need to do two things. There's a lot of things to it, and a lot of issues that might come up, but there's really only two things that you need to essentially focus on. Are they able and willing to pay rent? So let's break that down. First, are they able, right? Do they have a job or income or cash? Like, do they have a huge savings account, or do they have some trust fund that's feeding them money every month? Do they have a job? Do they have a regular salary or proof of income? Something like that. So can they afford it? And then two, are they willing to? So I've met lots of people who have money, but they have a chip on their shoulder, and they don't they kind of stick their nose up at authority. Those applicants are the types of people that just don't respect you enough to pay on time, even though they can. Maybe it's just not convenient, and they're willing to just put them before you, regardless of what the lease or the contract says. So you really got to filter out both of those aspects. And then two, generally speaking, this is a great rule. Set your approval criteria in the beginning, and then treat everyone equally. So you want to make sure that you're going to have like a bar that all applicants have to meet. And when, if they do, then they pass, and if they don't, then you reject them. But you have to make sure that you treat them equally. So if your place is no pets, don't reject somebody for having a dog and then accept another one that has a dog. Or if it's non-smoking, you better not accept a smoker if you've rejected somebody who was a smoker. So you really got to be equal. Even if it's not a protected class, you really do have to treat everyone equally. So just set that bar, make it easy on yourself, and just say, listen, those are the rules. Then you don't become the bad guy when you have to reject somebody. Let's talk about the protected classes. I mentioned pets and smoking. Those are certainly not protected classes, but there are 7 federally protected classes, and that's out of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. So, number 1, race. That's obvious. Color, religion, sex, familial status, including children or pregnancy, national origin, or a mental or physical disability. So it's important to note, maybe I'll start with number 5, right? I mean, the first 4 are pretty obvious, but number 5, familial status. That, everyone has a family, but what it's really talking about, and at the core of it, it's really talking about children. It's really talking about, if you have a couple who's applying to your place, and then you have another couple but has 3 kids, as long as that family is within the occupancy limit set by the county, then you can't deny them over the other couple just because they have kids. I mean, there could be other reasons. There could be income issues or whatever, but just because they have kids or because they are having kids, you just can't even touch that. So maybe you have 2 couples and one of them's pregnant and the other one's not. Like, you can't do that because you don't want a baby in your house. Like, that's just absolutely wrong. Number 6, national origin. You can't discriminate based on where somebody's from. So if someone's Haitian or from China or wherever, you can't do that. I'm just going to leave it there. You can't do that. And then mental or physical disability. There are things that fit into that, all kinds of things that fit into that. I mean, obviously, physical disabilities could be anything from blindness to hearing to, being in a wheelchair. Mental could be anything from, could be hoarding even, or other mental issues. So, it depends on if they're claiming it as a disability. I'm happy to answer questions about that later. Okay, so, and again, this is just a very high level. I go into like 4 more levels deep on all of this stuff on my full tenant screening webinar, but this is just going to be a quick overview, and then we'll get into the questions. Let's talk about my screening process. This is what I get asked about almost every day, it seems like, in an email. So my 9-step screening process to making sure that I get high quality tenants. And I'm going to go through these. So bear with me if I speed through them. We can go back to them if we need to. But number 1, when I get an inquiry about an advertisement, I will do a pre-screen, right? It's either through email or through phone, but I'll ask them a couple questions and just see if they fit, right? I mean, because even though my ad may say no pets and no smoking or whatever, then I often ask them again, because sometimes they just think they can slip a pet in, or sometimes they just ignore it or didn't see it. That's possible too. So if I get them to reiterate that, hey, I have a job, or hey, I don't smoke, or things like that. But if they do pass that initial inquiry, and that's just a real quick inquiry, then I schedule a property tour with them, and I just say, hey, come on over, let's get together. I'll show you the place. You can bring your group or your family or whatever, and I'll get to know you, and we can talk more there. And they usually love that. So that all together takes about 40 minutes. That's the longest part of it, really. The next part, everything below this dotted line that you see on the screen, is something that I can do in about an hour, okay? That's super quick. For those property managers who actually take tenant screening seriously, you'll know that an hour is unheard of. So oftentimes when you include all the screening reports, it takes much longer than that. So if they want to apply, right, then the third step is get them an application, and I do this all online through Cozy. It's all online. They can do it through their phone or they can do it on their computer, and then I do an ID verification. So I initially do an ID verification through Cozy, and we actually have the system where they have to put in their social security number and answer a couple of security questions, like credit reporting type questions, and questions like, what was your car payment in 2005 on your Honda Accord, right? I mean, something that's like $312, and you wouldn't know that unless you actually owned it. But questions like that, and then that actually helps to verify they are who they say they are. But I always do look at a photo ID too. Number 4, the next step is that I do proof of income and employment. Uh, once they apply and I look at all that stuff, or at least that application, that's 15 minutes. The next one is proof of employment. They usually say how much they make on their application. It's a salary of some sort, and I need to make sure that's right. So I don't ever really call employers. It's just not worth my time. I'll ask them to provide a pay stub, and that pay stub will show me when they, if they've been working there for the amount of time that they've been working there, because I'll see a year-to-date salary, and then it'll also show me the month or their monthly salary, and if there's any sort of deductions like child support or anything else, garnishments that they might have that they don't typically see. Then, if all that checks out, then I'll go through and do landlord references. And so sometimes I'll swap 4 and 5 on this list. It depends on kind of what's going on at the time. But I call their last 2 landlords. You always want to make sure you call the last 2, because if you just call their last landlord, that last landlord is probably still living or still with that tenant. That tenant is still living there. So that last landlord is not going to know how that tenant actually left the property, right? The tenant has not moved out yet, so has not had an opportunity to clean or trash it. But the tenant or the landlord before that will know. So that's why you always want to call 2. So do your due diligence there. Review a credit report and a score and a background check and the sex offender database, which is a national website. So all 3 of those take me about 10 minutes to look at. And the beauty of Cozy is that you can actually require those, at least the background check and the credit report, with the application. So you can actually roll that into step number 3. And so when I get that application, I get all the other things at the same time. I don't even have to touch it until all that stuff's there, which is just amazing. It saves me so much time. And then number 9, at the end of the day, you have to consider the entirety of all the applicants of the group, right? Like if it's a group of 5 people, roommates or something, or if it's a whole family and there's multiple adults or something, consider the entirety of the group, because they are typically going to apply with joint and several liability. So, so they take responsibility for each other. So you do kind of look at them as a whole. So, and I'm happy to answer more questions about that. Again, this is just a high level overview. One of the things that people always ask me is like, what do you really look for? What are your bullet points of your standards in screening? And these are mine. These are also industry best practices, but this is what I do. When I look at their income, I always make sure that it's 2.5 times the rent. And you can choose. You can make it 2 times the rent. You can make it 3 times the rent. You can make it 5 times the rent. Whatever you want. But I think 2.5 times is about right for me in my area. Meaning, if the rent is $1,000, then as a household, they need to make $2,500 a month. Does that make sense? So 2.5 times. That means they can afford rent, pay all their bills, and do other things. Now, if they have a tremendous amount of credit card debt and I don't have any other applicants to quote unquote discriminate against, I can kind of work with them and say, well, listen, you need to have more income or whatever because you've got so much debt. I don't ever deal with anybody with an eviction on their record, and that's where that background check comes into play. It's so critical. The reason I say never for an eviction, it's because I'm looking for an actual conviction. It's not that they were kicked out of a place. I mean, that kind of stuff where a landlord, wrongfully maybe kicks them out or they do something and then they just leave. That never shows up on a background check. Why? Because they never went to court. A real eviction is where they have an argument with the landlord and a dispute, and they go to eviction court. The landlord's trying to regain possession, and the judge hears both sides of the story, and then he or she says, Mr. or Mrs. Tenant, you were absolutely wrong in the situation. You must leave, and I am awarding the eviction judgment to the landlord. And then it goes on their record, right? So that means they decided to fight the landlord, and they were wrong. That a judge has ruled against them. So if it gets to that point, I don't want to deal with that type of person, because then they're going to pretend or think that I'm doing something wrong too, right? Because that landlord clearly was in the right. So I don't want to deal with people who are going to go that far. Number three, no convictions in the last 2 years. This recently has been in the news, not this particular statement, but HUD, uh, the housing department, the Office of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, came out with a memo that basically said you can't discriminate based on criminal activity, because in this country the data, or the number of convictions for African Americans and Hispanics, and Latinos, that it's so much higher than any other race, and so it's just it's unfair, right? You're discriminating against race or nationality because of criminal activity, and I don't agree with that. I think it's a business decision at this point. You look at the big picture, but what they're basically saying is you're not allowed to make blanket statements, and you can go read the memo too. It just basically says, blanket statements could be considered discrimination. Now, HUD does not have the ability to make laws. They are not a lawmaking authority. They are just releasing this memo for people to talk about and potentially think about making a law. So don't think that it's a law. Now, fair housing is a law, but they have protected classes, which we talked about. So don't make blanket statements like I'm never going to accept anybody who's ever been arrested. Well, that's stupid, because if you've been arrested, people get arrested all the time and they didn't do anything wrong, right? They didn't actually get a conviction. So really, just look at convictions, look at real judgments, not DUIs or whatever. Okay. So number four, I don't ever deal with anybody who's had a violent or armed crime ever. If somebody's been to jail for battery or murder or anything like that, like, I don't want to be on the other side of the door when they've got a baseball bat in the corner, right? And I'm following up on some rent or something. I just don't want to deal with somebody who potentially could put me in the hospital. And then if they have a tremendous amount of debt, I don't deal with it. So no or low credit card debt, especially like store credit cards, right? Like Gap or Victoria's Secret, like all those credit card store bought things, and just those are horrible cards. They have the highest interest rates ever, and it makes poor financial sense. Okay, so let me show you some credit report and credit score from Cozy. This is what I look at when I do my my screening. So I'll blow this up for you. You should be able to see it. I'm sorry if it's small. I'll try to make it big. Okay, so this is a credit report for Mr. James Hacker. It's a sample. James Hacker is not a real person. But you can see at the top here, this is what you get when you order a credit report through Cozy. A big credit score, and it shows where they sit in the United States based on all the population. And this guy's got a pretty great credit score, according to this. It shows me how much of their available credit is used, and that's a good sign. I never like to look at somebody who's got like a 90% used credit, because that means they're maxing out everything. But then it shows me the total monthly payments and what it's going towards. So I can tell how much money is going towards a mortgage, how much money is going towards a lease or an auto loan or credit card, right? And I usually like to see the credit card at the bottom here, because that shows that they don't borrow a lot of commercial debt or unsecured debt. But this is actually my favorite part of the credit report. It shows the total debt and what it's made of, right? So Mr. James Hacker has $202,000 in debt, and that's a lot unless you start to think about it. And you're like, well, maybe it's a mortgage, or maybe it's a line of credit, and that's not that much. So sure enough, he's got a credit line, probably on a HELOC or something, that's $130,000, and then he's got other things here which are a lot less. So I would certainly take somebody with $200,000 in hospital debt or mortgage debt, somebody who owes for some back surgery or something. I would take that over somebody with $20,000 in credit card debt. Just doesn't make a lot of sense to accept somebody with so much credit card debt. But then it goes into how many accounts have ever been late, how long has it been, if there's any collections, and then public records, which all should show up in the background check. And then you can see the trade lines and the actual payments for each month over the last 2 years and how it's split up. So all of their accounts. So this is really great. It's super pretty. It's just super easy to read. If you're like me, you've tried every other background company on the planet and all their credit reports, and they just look like a bunch of data, like an old 1982 printer spit it out. And there's just no need for that anymore. The background checks are here are some examples. Here's two. We have one for Mr. Buster Bluth and George Michael Bluth. And if you don't know who they are, they're from Arrested Development, so they are also not real people. But you can see here that Buster has an all clear score, and then then George does not. George apparently was convicted of arson, which is not surprising if you've seen the show. But what this background check does through Cozy is it verifies the social security number, it checks eviction records, sex offender search, terrorist watch list, national and county criminal if something pops up at the national level. So they're great. It's just a great peace of mind tool. So let's get back on track here. Let's talk about the big picture. I mentioned accepting or considering the entirety of all applicants. That's so critical. You want to make sure that as a whole they meet your criteria. So if you have a credit limit or a credit score requirement of like 700, right, and all of them meet 700 except for one, and he's like 650. Well, 650 is still a good score, but like as a whole, you could average it out, right? As long as you average it out for everybody, all the groups. So you set your rules and consider the entirety of it. Look at their entire income, not just one. Other considerations that can come into play on whether or not you want to select one group over the other is if someone's willing to sign a longer lease. Perhaps a 2-year lease is great. Perhaps that's better for you, or maybe you like the month-to-month lease. So, does that match up? Are they able to move in when you need them to? How many cars they have? And that sounds silly, but it's not so silly when they're parking 10 cars on your grass, because Pookie wants to come visit every night. It's a little silly, but you got to look at that kind of stuff too. Pets, do they have a dog or cat, or do they have 20? That kind of stuff really, or is the dog pregnant? There is no protected class for familial status for animals, so you can certainly discriminate based on the fact that dog is going to have 10 puppies in a week. Hypochondriacs and hoarders, complainers, hobbies, things like that. If you're doing a walkthrough with somebody or showing and the guy whips out a handkerchief and he touches the doorknobs and touches the light switches with the handkerchief, then that guy's going to call you up a week later and say like, oh, I think the place has mold, and it doesn't, right? You may live in Arizona. There's no mold anywhere. But they think there is, and you just have an issue. Hoarders can certainly be a fire hazard, so it can certainly be a problem, but it can also be a mental disability if they're claiming that. So just be careful with that. Complainers, I always like to ask them, hey, why are you moving? And if they're like, oh, my landlord's so horrible, blah, 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 well, then that's a red flag that they're going to think you're horrible too, no matter how nice you are. Maybe they're justified, but maybe they're not. Just something to consider. And then hobbies, are they in a rock band? Is a 300 unit apartment complex and you're right smack in the middle? Your unit is like, middle floor, right in the middle of a long hallway. Are they going to practice on their drums at midnight and disrupt all the neighbors? That kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, remember, it's a business decision. Make it professionally. Do not discriminate. Set the bar equally for everyone. And make a business decision. Take your emotions out of it. Don't go on your gut feeling. Look at the evidence, look at the data. And then lastly, I want to make sure that I explain this a little bit. You are allowed to accept applicants that may not have been the first. So you're allowed to accept the most qualified applicants. I have a longer story that goes into this, but it is recommended. It is a business best practice to accept the first applicant. But if the second applicant is 1,000 times better and you haven't accepted the first one yet, then you can go with the second one. If you disagree, shoot me an email. But I've talked to a couple lawyers, talked to the fair housing offices. It's certainly a best practice, but it's not required nor law. Okay, so resources. This is kind of the end of the presentation. We'll get into the Q&A here. Resources, before we leave, before we get into it, please go check out Landlordology, check out Cozy. Look down in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. There's a section called Handouts. It says Handouts 2 of 5. There are 2 things in there that you can take home with you. So as we continue to talk, feel free to download them. One is this presentation, the slides. So you'll get all those slides there that we just went through, or I should say that I flew through. And then 2, there's a tenant screening checklist, which is just a great little checklist that you can walk through as you're talking to somebody on the phone or you're doing, reviewing. You can make sure you hit all the right things and make sure you're looking at them properly. So you check all your, check all your boxes. That's it. So thank you all for listening to that short little presentation. That is just the top level information for the larger tenant screening webinar, which we do usually every 2 or 3 months. But let's get into Q&A. So again, how this works is if you have a question, go ahead and type it in that questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. Maggie has been looking at those as we've been talking, and we even had some come through email, which Maggie has a spreadsheet in front of her that has all that stuff too. So what we'll do is we'll answer it in order. So Maggie, why don't you take it away and start feeding them up?
Great. So the first question is from Kevin. He writes, I will be having multiple tenants in the same unit. They are asking to use their parents as co-signers since they are all young and their credit isn't that great. Should I have co-signers be added as co-applicants in Cozy so that the co-signers can do credit and background checks in Cozy?
Absolutely. Yes. And this is very common with younger applicants. I mean, I deal with mostly young applicants between the age of 22 and 28. And if they're just getting their career started, they either don't have a job or they're making like 20 grand a year. So they can't afford the places. And almost always there's at least one cosigner. So when you do have a cosigner, or when that group doesn't have enough income, right, to meet the 2.5 times the rent amount, then you do need some additional source of income, and that's where the cosigner comes in. So a cosigner has to be treated like every other applicant. The only difference is they're actually not living at the property. So when I screen a cosigner, I say, make sure you add them to your application group in Cozy, and you can go in, the tenants can go in and add in more people later. They can add in more parents or whatever is needed, and the parents will get an invite, and then they fill out the application just like a normal applicant. I tell them, listen, I know that I require a background check from the tenants and a credit report, but as a as a co-signer, I don't really need a background check from you. I don't care if you've had criminal activity. I don't really care because you're not living in the property, right? You're not there. All I really care about is your financial ability to cover the rent if they don't pay. So I do make them do a credit report, and I do make them fill out a full application, and that's how I verify their income. So that income will get added to the group, and then in Cozy it actually does this fantastic little analysis. Oops, let me do this. I'll actually show that to you right now. It does this cute little analysis here. Let me go back. Yeah. Does an analysis for how much of the income is actually taken up by the rent. Pardon if it's a little slow here with all the webinar and everything. It's taking up the bandwidth. So it just seems it crawls whenever I'm doing a webinar. All right. So if I'm looking at this group, and these are also anonymized names. These aren't real names and real email addresses. But you can see here in this group, they have 1, 2, 3, 4 people who have applied in this group already, and 2 that have yet to apply. But so far, all their income here is grouped together, and it tells me how much, as a whole, their rent is towards the total. So if the rent is $5,400, as a whole, these 4 people make $21,000 a month. That's not even including the 2 that haven't applied. So they would qualify. So yes, this would help you figure out cosigners too. That was a long-winded answer. Thanks.
All right, next question is from Nina. She writes, how do you avoid professional tenants who have sealed their previous eviction cases and criminal history?
Well, if they've sealed it, then there's nothing you can do, right? I mean, if they've gone through the measures to seal that data, then and they don't disclose it, um, then there's nothing you can do. So unfortunately, that's just part of the business. What you can do, and then what happens in Cozy is in the application, there's actually a checkbox or a toggle as they're filling out the application, and this is before they even get to the background check part. But there's a toggle that says like, have you ever been convicted? Or are you a felon? That kind of basic questions like, do you smoke? Just general screening questions. And if they say no, but they do have it, and you find out about it later, that can be considered lying on the application, right? That can be considered, um, just forging that information. And so you could theoretically terminate the lease for that if you find out later. But no, if they seal it, um, there's not much you can do in terms of getting that data.
All right. So next question is from Janet. This is in relation to tenant screening and discrimination. Her situation is, or the situation she's posed to us is, when screening tenants, if she denies one based on low credit score and incomplete application, but then accepts another application with a similar credit issue, but have completed their application and have also positively verified their income, could that be found as discriminatory?
I don't see how it could, because filling out an application completely is kind of a first line of defense, right? Can you imagine trying to apply for a job and you forgot to fill in your name, right? I mean, it's just like you're immediately going to be eliminated. So it's kind of the same thing. If the tenant just fails to fully enter information, like I've had tenants who fail to put in their income. Like, how am I going to qualify you if you don't even tell me how much you make? So, basic things like that, where it's like, well, if you really want this place, you're going to fill it out completely. So I actually don't consider an application or credit report or background check being submitted to me until it's complete. So if it is incomplete, I'll kick it back and say, listen, I can't even review this yet until you finish it. And then there's no form of discrimination because they have yet to actually submit the application. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks. That was a good one.
All right, the next one's from Darwin. Any tips on scheduling services at a rented property? For example, termite, AC services, etc. Do you refer the service scheduler to the tenant?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, sometimes I do. So I'm local to a lot of my properties, and then some of them I'm not. But the ones that I'm local to, I will certainly ask my tenants, and I'll say this up front when they're signing leases, that I will expect them to meet with some service professionals, especially if it's something that's related to something that they did. Like if they clogged a toilet or a sink or something, I would expect them to be there when the plumber shows up, and I'm happy to call the plumber and make sure it happens. But I'd expect them just to take off work, or stay earlier, stay later, whatever, and take care of it. Um, they literally just have to let the guy in and let him do his thing. With bigger issues that may actually be my responsibility, like termites, right? A tenant doesn't actually cause termites. That's just something that happens. That's something that a landlord needs to take care of. I will certainly ask if hey, can you do me a favor? Can you just be at the property and let the guy in? But oftentimes, if it's a bigger repair, like a roof replacement or windows or termites, I often want to be there. I often want to see what's going on and talk to the guy and make sure that he's going to do the job right. So I'll try to be there. But if it's a long distance property where you're not remote or you're not local, then yes, by all means, like tell the tenant, hey, listen, you just need to be there, and let the guy in. So that's perfectly acceptable.
All right, here's another question from Kevin. For the income requirement that you set for yourself, Lucas, the 2 to 3 times rent, is that gross or net income?
Oh, good question. I didn't specify. Yes, that is gross, which means it is what they make before taxes are taken out. So that's why it's 2.5 times the rent, right? That's why it's not just one time, right? It's not like it's exactly what the rent is. There needs to be some money for taxes. There needs to be some money for food and for car payments and childcare and all that stuff. So you need extra, and that's why it's 2.5 times. So it's gross. The only thing that I do remove from the scenario is when I look at their pay stub and they may have like $600 that goes to child support right off the bat, or there's a judgment and a garnishment that's being taken out right away. I will remove that from the scenario and then deduct that and then count it. So or count the total. Because they don't see that money anyway, typically. Garnishments, it just disappears out of their paycheck. So it's not something that they can even play with. So anyway, yeah, gross is the answer. Thanks for asking. That's very important.
All right, here's a question from Pamela. She writes, sometimes people make fake check stubs or have other people pretend they are the landlord. Have you ever heard of this, and how do you suggest to get around this?
Yes. Yes, people are sometimes tenants with bad records will be sneaky because they've been burned before by whatever it is that got them evicted or whatever. So they try to figure out a way to get into a property through deceit. And yes, they will make up fake pay stubs, or they will get a friend. This is probably the most common thing. They'll say, "Hey, you can talk to my former landlord," and then they give you the name and phone number of one of their friends, and then their friend is like, pretends to be the landlord when you call. Well, let's take them two things at a time. One, with fake pay stubs or fake credit reports, that's also something like I should say, I would say a 15-year-old kid in a high school computer lab with Photoshop can make a fake credit report. They can change one number and it looks fantastic. They can also do that with pay stubs. So yes, Photoshop is an amazing tool, and you do have to be wary of it. But what I like to do is, uh, you know, if I can get a copy of the pay stub, I will often try to figure out what the email address is. So if they say they work for Google, let's just say, then I'll either try to figure it out or I'll ask them what their email address is, and then I'll actually just email them. I'll email them at the work address, and this is if I'm suspicious of something and I don't have any other options. Then ask them just to reply back, from that work email address. That'll let me know that they actually do work there. And if I'm even more suspicious, then I'll try to call the company. But you know, it's hard sometimes to get corporations to reveal information even about whether or not the employee even works there. So the pay stub is the best thing you can do. You can look at that. You can figure out. Just look very carefully, see if there's any weird looks on the image that shows that it might be altered a bit. And if you're not sure, then you can actually ask for their latest tax return. If they really want the place and you're having questions about it, just ask them to show you that. And I suppose they could forge that too, but that'll show you what they made last year, and that should match up with what their pay stub says. In terms of talking to landlords, I have a series of questions where I just say, ask them questions like, when did the lease start? That your former lease, when did that start? And what, how much was the rent that they paid? And all this stuff should be on the application that you received. And if that's a real landlord, they would know those answers. If it's their buddy, they're not really going to know what date that former lease started, or they're not really going to know what the rent was for their friend. So those are just questions where you kind of weed it out and figure it out. Good question. Thank you, Pamela.
All right, here's a question from another Maggie, great name. She writes, how can I fill out a test application in Cozy before referring applicants to it so I know what it's like and can answer any questions?
Oh, yeah, no, that's actually really common. So in Cozy, let me see what I can show you here. Oops, that's not it. Okay. I'll pull open. Um, I've got a couple of fake listings here. As a landlord, you have a landlord account in Cozy, and you can create a listing, and that listing is not really available to you to fill out as a landlord because Cozy already knows that you're a landlord account, that you are a landlord, and you're trying to apply with your own landlord account. And why would a landlord apply to their property? But what you can do is log out of your account, and you can just do that up here, and then go to your preview page or go to your actual application page and just create a new account as a tenant. Create a tenant account and just fill it out. That way Cozy won't know that it's you, and that you'll actually be able to experience it from the standpoint of a tenant. And so you can actually walk through that whole thing. You can even order a credit report, to go through that and see. You'd have to pay for it, but you get your own credit report, and then your landlord account would be able to see that too. So that's a great way to experience it. This is an example report. It's got a bunch of gibberish here since it's an example, but you would see a little login box right there where you could fill it out and create a new account. So it's actually really easy, and a lot of people do it just to see what that experience is like. But we also have a support site. It's support.cozy.co. And when you go there, a lot of times they have screenshots when you're browsing through some of the FAQs, and it'll walk you through what an application looks like, so you can actually see it that way if you want to. Thank you for that question.
All right, here's another question from Janet about tenant screening criteria. She writes, can I have, as part of my criteria, no collections or delinquencies?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, collections or delinquencies are not a protected class or protected by fair housing. So that's a financial thing. That's like you could make up the standard of your screening being like, I don't want anybody who's ever had a credit card ever, right? I mean, you wouldn't have any tenants or applicants who would pass your standard, but you can make up your own rules as long as you're fair and consistent with everyone, and so you keep that same rule. So yeah, no delinquencies is fine. I would say that make sure you specify what that means. So if someone is late on one credit card payment from a year and a half ago, and it shows up that they were late by 5 days, it's going to show up as being late, but that's a delinquent record, so you wouldn't want to necessarily count that against them. But just make sure you're very specific and document exactly what that means for you, so that you can't be accused later. Good question.
All right, here's a question from Kendra. It sounds like a tricky situation.
Okay.
She writes, I have a tenant that repainted the entire house in custom colors, including dark colors,
Oh no.
when it is clearly on the agreement in 2 places they cannot paint. She's given them notice for another reason for 30 days. They were on month to month. And she writes, can I hold back security deposit to repaint the property? And is there a limit to how much I can hold back from their deposit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the general rule for holding security deposits is that there actually has to be a real financial or material expense associated with it. So if they violated the lease somehow, and clearly they painted when they shouldn't, then they should be responsible for returning the property to the condition it was when they first moved in. So if painting was prohibited and they did not get approval, and you are not okay with the color, and you don't want to leave it, then you could certainly have it painted back to whatever color it was at their expense. And you can use the security deposit for it. So I should say, if you do not use up the entire deposit to do that, and you probably will because painting's crazy expensive, but if you don't use it up, then you have to give back whatever's left. But if you use it up, or you actually use more, you can actually demand that they pay any excess damages. Chances of them actually paying it are very slim. They're just going to say, no way, Jose, and you'll never find me. But that's when you have the option of then, filing a small claims lawsuit against them if you know where they live, or you can serve them, or even filing with a credit reporting agency. So yeah, for sure, if they violate the lease, you can take their deposit to repaint. Just make sure you don't take more than you need.
All right, here's a question from Louise. Can we use this in Australia? Could we get the credit files for clients here too?
That's a great question. Unfortunately, no. So the credit reporting system we have is through Experian, and it runs off of a social security number. So Cozy actually still only works in the United States, and it will work with any address that's in the United States. So any property or unit that it has a U.S. address, and then it's able to send money only to U.S. bank accounts when you're doing rent collection. And for screening, we're limited by what the credit bureau is limited to. So yeah, it would not work in Australia. But we actually have big plans. We will probably start making Cozy available in Canada. I can't tell you when, but shortly after that, it'll probably be Europe and then Australia. So we have plans for big worldwide software, and it's going to be great. So hang in there with us and just keep an eye on Cozy, and I hope we can work together soon.
Here's a question from Laura. She writes, after a phone interview, if you don't like them, what do you say?
Well, if it's if it's obvious, if there's just a clear cut answer, like I'll ask them, hey, how many dogs do you have, or do you have any pets? And they say, oh yeah, I've got, or if I hear a dog barking in the background, I'll usually ask about that. And if they tell me about a dog that they have, and I say, hey, did you know that there's no pets at this place? Um, I usually wait to kind of see what they're going to say, but usually that's just a showstopper. So, it is a business, and I try not to waste anybody's time. So if it's clearly a no, I'll just tell them, hey, listen, it's not going to work out. Thanks for your interest. Good luck to you. Um, hope you can find a house that fits your needs. But if it's something I realize after the phone call has ended, and I realize that it's just not going to work out because of income or something they applied and the income's just not there or whatever, then I'll call them to reject them, because that will oftentimes be way easier. I know it's harder to do emotionally, but call them because it gives them a chance to ask questions. Now, sometimes you don't want them to ask questions, but I always think that it's always better when you call somebody and talk to them as if they're a real person, and that they have feelings, and that you want to actually um, you're being respectful. So I will also send them a formal email with a rejection, but I always call first. So yeah, if it's not going to work out, don't waste your time or their time. Just make it quick and pull that band-aid off if you can, and just move on to the next person.
All right, here's another question from Nina. She writes, how long can you take between late rent and reporting late rent to the credit agency?
Good question. Yes, late rent. So when someone doesn't pay on time, then each state has a different regulation on how much time you have to give them. It's ridiculous that we don't have some sort of flat rule in the United States, but it's true. Every single state has a different rule, and it could be anywhere from no time at all, like it could be absolutely terminated. The lease could be terminated on day 2, anywhere from up to 30 days. So I've seen some states that are 30 days, some states that are 3 days, some days are 5. It really varies, and we actually have a website that will help with that. We have Landlordology, and if you click on state laws, you'll see this map, and this map will actually show you all the state laws. So you can go into here, and if you click on, let's say, California, you'll see all the rules for that state, and these are actually pulled from the statutes, so you can click on the statutes and see for yourself. If you scroll down here, where does it say late rent? Late fees. Late fees are allowed but reasonable. I don't see the amount of days needed. So maybe in California there's no notice period, or no late fee grace period. Other states, like in Virginia, I know it's 5 days. So yeah, check out your state laws. That's how many days you might have to allow, and then after that, once that grace period is over, then you can start charging late fees. What you can also do is, if they don't pay by the notice period required, then you can actually terminate the lease. So, or I should say, you can give notice when it's immediately late, and then that notice period allows you to terminate the lease when it's over. So let's just say that termination for non-payment is 3 days. If they're late on the first, you can send them a notice 3 days later. If they still haven't paid up or left and abandoned the apartment, then you can actually terminate it and then file for eviction. I don't ever recommend that you actually report anything to a credit collection agency or a collection agency until you actually have a judgment. Because until you actually have a judgment, then you could be accused of causing false damages. Like, who's to say that you're right? I mean, I know that you feel like you're right, but a judge has not ruled in your favor. You do not have a judgment, and so I don't recommend ever causing damage financially to another tenant until you have that judgment. So it's always important to go to small claims or eviction court first. Thank you for that question. That was actually a really good one.
Here's a question from David about ACH deposits.
Okay.
He's concerned about the length of time it takes to receive into their landlord account. And if he has to make a mortgage payment on the 10th, but ACH takes longer than that, what would happen if the tenant's check bounces?
Gotcha.
So it sounds like there's kind of a couple questions wrapped into one there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll talk about it in context to Cozy. So Cozy, primarily when Cozy started, we really only did rent collection. That was our bread and butter. That was what we did best. And then we've expanded to tenant screening and other things. And we do rent collection for free for both the tenant and the landlord if you do the standard ACH payment. And that's where somebody pays from one bank account to the next, and it goes through the automated clearinghouse network, which is or automated clearinghouse system, which is ACH, which is one of the oldest financial transaction systems in the U.S. and it goes through the Federal Reserve. It's like 20 years old, and it's kind of like the old steam engine train of the United States. It just keeps chugging along, and no one has yet to fix it. But that's what all the banks use to transfer money in this country. And it typically takes about 5 business days for that to happen. So if you want free payments and you don't want to pay anything for them, then you can get that, but it will take 5 days. So you can plan for that, and you can say if your rent's due on the 1st, you'll have it by the 5th business day. If there's a weekend in there, maybe it'll be like the 7th of the month. Or you could always just tell your tenants like, hey, I need the money in my account by the 1st, so you could pay me on the 25th, or set up your recurring payments for earlier so I get it sooner. If you want to speed things up, you could pay $2.99 per unit. So you may have one single apartment that has 4 tenants in it, and you're still only going to pay $2.99 a month for that unit. And you can have unlimited express payouts. It's Cozy Express payouts, and that only takes about 2 days. It's a one whole day, but if it starts on Monday, you'll get your money on Wednesday. And that's a lot quicker, and it's actually dirt cheap. So that's a way you could speed it up if you have a tenant or a unit that you're concerned about, or a mortgage that's due earlier in the month. Most mortgages are due on the 1st, but then not late till the 15th. So there's like a 15-day grace period where there's no penalty. With ACH and with Cozy, there's really, well, I can't say with every ACH, but with Cozy, there's no bounce check issues. If the money's not there in their account, it's just immediately going to fail. There's no penalty because there's really no effort involved. We just know that it's not going to work. And then when that happens, then all the parties are notified. So that happened to me actually just recently. I got an email at 8 a.m. on the 1st, and it said that, John's rent payment was failing and he didn't have any money. And then by the time I logged in to check it out at 9:30 in the morning, John had already logged into Cozy and moved money around or selected a different account. I'm not sure exactly what he did, but he fixed it, and the money was already starting to process. So, he had an issue. He had basically had a bounce check minus the check, and it was fixed in an hour and a half instead of 10 days. So that's the beauty of using something like Cozy. You'll never have to deal with those issues again. Thanks. Good question.
Here's another question from Kendra. She has a family that has applied that has 6 kids for a 4-bedroom house. That house has a septic system and cannot handle 8 people. Is that a legal reason to deny them?
That's a great question. So it's really not the occupancy, it's really the septic system. I would say that that's probably an okay reason, to be honest. It's not that they have kids. Remember, that's familial status. It's not that they have kids that's the problem. It's the fact that there's 8 people. So as a safety net, you might want to check with your county. Go to the code enforcement office or call them up. And every county has one. They have a big code book that they look into if you go visit them. And they'll tell you how many occupants are allowed in that type of house in that zone. So each county is different. Oftentimes it's like 2 people per bedroom is kind of what the usual limit is. And if you only have, you said you have a 4 bedroom house, so that would be 2 people per bedroom. So 8 people could, if that's the rule, then 8 people could theoretically live there. But the septic system can't handle it. Then you can say that's just the rule. I've been told by the manufacturer or whatever it is that can only really handle a 6-person occupancy, and just say it's a flaw of the property itself. Um, so if you really want to be sure, I suggest talking to a lawyer about that. If you're really concerned about it, but otherwise, just be honest with the people and say, here's the problem. And if I let you stay here, there's a solid chance that we're going to have to dig up the septic field and fix it, in a month or two. And they probably don't want to deal with that either.
All right, here's a follow-up question from Nina regarding
Sure.
the credit reporting. Can I report late payments to the credit agencies after a certain amount of time? For example, 15 days, 30 days.
Oh, to the credit. Well, you can't actually report to a credit bureau. So there's Experian, um, Equifax, and TransUnion, and those are the 3 big credit bureaus in the country. They won't even talk to you if you call them up and you say, "I'd like to report my tenant." They're just going to hang up the phone. You're not big enough for them to deal with it, uh, and they don't want to deal with it, right? Because they don't. It's a liability for them, to talk to you, especially if you don't have a judgment. Um, the only other way to get it put on their credit report is to work with a collection agency, right? And those people will have the ability to report all of their accounts to the credit bureaus. So again, 15 days, 20 days, 100 days, I don't care what the days are. I don't suggest ever hiring a collection agency until you have a judgment, because if you don't have a judgment and you damage that person's credit and they get irritated and they come back and they sue you and they win, then not only are you liable for whatever debt that you think that they owed you, but now you're liable for the financial damages that you might have caused on their credit. So don't go down that road until you have a judgment. So go to small claims, get that judgment, then you can hire a collections agency. But I will tell you this: in the world of landlording and property management, landlords have some of the worst records for actually getting back debt from a collections agency. It's just pennies on the dollar. It's like worse than dentists, right? Dentists have a horrible record for collecting debt. So you may hire them, but I wouldn't be surprised if you get any money out of it. The better way to do it is to look into garnishments, getting judgments to go take some of their wages away. And then, that's embarrassing. That'll hurt them more than a credit ding. If you walk into their employer with a court order that says this guy needs to pay me out of his paycheck, $400 a month until the debt's paid, that's embarrassing because now his boss knows all about his financial irresponsibilities. So that's what I prefer doing. But again, you have to go to court to do that. So good one, Kendra, or Nina, sorry.
All right, a final question from Nina. Can you have a sheriff lock out an occupant that's not named on the lease, um, but named on the unlawful detainer complaint and defaulted, so they're independent to the person on the lease?
Okay, okay, um, but they are listed on the unlawful
I
detainer.
don't think they're listed on the lease.
Okay, well, if they're not listed on the lease,
Yeah.
then they're just an unauthorized occupant. However, they still may be an occupant. So, you've probably heard of things called squatters, people like that, when that's a whole different scenario and topic. But the principle still applies that if somebody is allowed to take residence in a property and they've made that their home for some period of time, it's a little bit different each state. Sometimes it's 30 days, sometimes it's less. But if they're allowed to make that their home, then a police officer is not going to lock that person out, right? I mean, the police, the only thing worse for the police than an unauthorized occupant is having people sleep on the street, right? They don't want people being unsafe. They're protecting the citizens, and that means that they're going to let that citizen sleep in your apartment instead of the sidewalk. So they're not going to lock them out. If you have an unlawful detainer action, and you've won that judgment, and you're able to go get a writ of possession that lets you hire the police. This is after you've gone through court and they've ruled in favor of you, and then you can actually go hire the police. Then, oh yeah, then the police will show up on the day they specify, and you show up too, and they will literally physically remove somebody from your property, and then you're welcome to change the locks. That's exactly what that's for. But don't do it beforehand. So don't just call the police and you can call them and have them show up, and that's fine, but let them make the decision. Don't expect them to do exactly what you want them to do. They're going to follow the law. So I hope that's clear. That was a complicated one.
Yeah. We have our last question from Christine.
Okay.
If a tenant continues to pay rent but does not occupy the unit, is that cause to deny a renewal?
If a tenant does not continue to pay rent but does not occupy the unit.
No,
Okay.
they're paying rent, but they're not living there.
Oh,
Can you not renew?
well, sure.
Or is that grounds to not renew?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I should say that if you have a fixed term lease with somebody and that lease is ending, there's no law really that says that you have to renew, right? I mean, tenants are not guaranteed renewal when a lease ends. It's a nice option, and it's nice. Hopefully, it works out. But if you're not happy with that tenant, then that's the whole point of the tenant or the tenancy ending. That's why the lease has an end date. So when that lease ends, that gives everybody an opportunity to continue or leave, including the landlord. So, yeah, if you're not happy with that tenant for whatever reason, there's no reason why you don't have to give a valid reason to not renew. So that's the point of an end date. If you, I actually had a tenant who was a doctor. He was a neurosurgeon, and he and his wife were neurosurgeons, and he rented one of my condos and was only in town for 1 week out of a month. And so the house or the condo was vacant for 3 weeks out of the month, and it was fantastic, right? I mean, he and his wife made about $600,000 a year, and he was the best tenant. He paid his rent on time and then barely used my place. So as long as I'm aware of that and I'm able to take care of any potential issues like freezing pipes or making sure windows are shut, things like that, I'm happy to do that, right? Because that's less wear and tear on the place. So as long as they're not abusing the unit, you might want to consider letting that tenant stay, because what harm are they doing? Just because they're not there doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. So, good one, Kendra. Thank you. Maggie, was that our last question, or do we have any more?
One more just came in from Kendra from her previous question about
Right.
the family who applied with 6 kids for the
Okay.
4-bedroom house with the
Yeah.
septic tank.
Sure.
Sorry, this was in regards to the paint question,
Okay.
where her tenant painted everything with dark colors. Do I actually have to repaint the place or just get an estimate to repaint?
Oh, good question. And let me apologize. The previous question was for Christine, not Kendra. This one's Kendra. Yeah. So if they repaint it or they paint it and it's a deduction, then you don't actually have to repaint. So just be honest. Estimates completely count. Like, you can use estimates in the court of law as long as it's from a reputable company and not your cousin who doesn't have a painting company. As long as it's real and that person or that company has a price list that they vouch for, and it's a real estimate, you can use that. I will say, though, if that estimate differs from the actual invoice, then you can ask the tenant to pay the difference. But also, if it's overestimating and it's too high, then you have an obligation to refund that tenant whatever excess money there was. So just be honest about it. Estimates aren't the actual final price, but they're close enough. So they certainly work. Yeah.
We had another question come in from Haley.
Okay.
Do you have to give an applicant a reason why you have chosen to go with someone else over them, or can you just send them an email letting them know and leave it at that?
Oh, that's a tough one. I have done both in my days, and I have regretted doing both sometimes. It really depends on the situation. But to answer your question, you do not have to give a reason because it's your business. Just like when you're looking to hire painters. Let's use Kendra's example for a case. Let's say she gets three quotes from different painters and they all give her really good estimates and she picks one. She doesn't actually have to tell the other two why she didn't choose them. It's probably because of price, but it could be for a variety of other reasons. Maybe one of them was just creepy, and she didn't like having them in the house. Um, but she doesn't have to explain that. Now with housing, it's a little different, right? It's housing and it's fair housing, and but you don't have to what is it that I can't think of the word. You don't have to validify your reason to that other applicant. You just have to say, I'm sorry, you know, I've chosen to go with someone else. Best of luck to you. Like, here's a couple of places if you want to help them try to find somewhere else that you might know of. The only exception, and before you start emailing me, on this, the only exception is if you deny them based on something that you find in their credit report, right? Then you should call that out. If it's some financial reason based on credit, then you should call that out. And actually, the law states that you need to be able to give them a means to get that credit report. A lot of times, old school property managers will just actually give them a copy of the credit report. But if you're using Cozy, then they already have access to it and they get to see everything that you see. So you can actually get online with them and you can talk to them over the phone and you can say, see this here, what's this all about? This is why I didn't, if you're concerned, you can ask them beforehand, or you can just reject them based on, their bankruptcy or something like that. So make sure you're clear about financial rejections. But if it's just because you selected a better, more qualified applicant, you can just say that. You can say that. If it helps you, you can tell them the reason, but you don't have to. I have certainly told other applicants before that I went with a different group because they were willing to sign a 3-year lease, and you guys were only willing to accept a 1-year lease, and so that was more appealing to me. So that's my suggestion. Okay.
Here's a question from Bart about Cozy specifically. Do credits issued back to my tenant go to their bank account, or is it used for their future Cozy payments?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So in the lease ledger, in the accounting method of Cozy, you as a landlord can issue credits back to the tenant, and this is actually very common in property management. So the tenant may paint a room in order to get a reduction of rent. So you could issue a credit and say like, hey, I'll credit you $300 if you paint the room. You can do that in Cozy. You just issue a credit, and all that does is it creates a positive balance against or positive transaction against the balance. So the next month they will just owe $300 less than what they might typically owe. And they can adjust their rent payments if they want to. They can reduce them by $300 to offset it, or they could continue to pay their regular amount. I had this happen to me once, or this actually recently with a tenant that's leaving. They just had this positive balance for a credit I gave them for some paint supplies, and they just carried it through to the end of the lease. And so their lease ended, and I'm about to give back that money in addition to the deposit. So I handle all that at the end. And I will say, as a landlord, it's actually really wise to kind of take care of all the financial transactions of actually paying the tenant back the deposit and any other credits all at the end. It just makes it simpler for your accounting. It just makes it easier to track. It just makes it is better. It's a better use of your time. So yeah, that's how it's handled in Cozy, and that's how it should be handled. Good one, Bart. That was a great question.
All right, we have a question from Eddie about Section 8 tenants.
Okay.
And how that would be set up using Cozy.
Yeah. No, Eddie, thank you for asking this one. Section 8 is a popular program. If you're not familiar with what that is, it's a federal program that's regulated at the state, or I should say at the county level. So there's Section 8, which is where the government helps provide for some rent for low income individuals. And uh, as a result, if you're a landlord and you're willing to work with the Section 8 housing department, then you will get a tenant who is applied for Section 8 support, and they will usually pay, let's say, 30% uh, of the rent with their own money. And then I'm just making up these numbers. Sometimes it's 60, sometimes it's 40, but let's just say it's 30%. And then the Section 8 housing office will send you the other part of the rent with a 70%. And so you'll actually get a check from the government, and then you'll get money from the tenant, and you put those together, and that's your rent. So how do you do that in Cozy, right? Because you're not going to be able to get the government to sign up for a landlord or a tenant account on your lease in Cozy. I mean, they're not going to sign up for anything. It's the government. But what you can do, and this is really awesome, you can actually get your tenant to sign up for Cozy and be a tenant, and they can pay their $300, let's say, through Cozy, through the normal means, through bank transfers or whatever. They can even pay with a credit card or debit card. And then when that check comes from the Section 8 housing office, then you take it, you deposit it with your phone using your mobile app or whatever, with your bank, or you drive it to your bank. You deposit it like a normal check, and then you go into Cozy and you hit a little button that says offline payment. And all that lets you do is it just lets you record that you received an offline payment from somebody that you're crediting towards this lease. In this case, it's Section 8. So you put together that tenant that is automatically paying, and then you add in this offline payment that you get from Section 8, and together that's the total rent amount, and it works beautifully. So Section 8, Cozy is completely compliant with the way Section 8 works, and it is being used by lots of landlords who accept Section 8 tenants. Thanks, Eddie. Okay.
All right. Do we have time for one more question?
We do. Let's make it the last. Let's do two more.
We've got 2 more. All right.
Okay, let's do 2 more, and then we'll call it because we've already run over. And thank you guys for staying so long. This has been fun. I wasn't quite sure what the response would be, but this is great. Okay, go ahead.
From Kendra, we've decided to sell a property that is on a month-to-month agreement. The new owners of the property are giving the tenants a 9-month lease with their own separate lease agreement. I gave them the lease from the new owners. I'm assuming that's the tenant she gave the lease to. Was there anything else I needed to do in this scenario?
Okay. Let me get this straight. So you had a month-to-month agreement with the tenant, and you sold the property, and then the new owners are giving the tenants a 9-month lease with their own separate agreement. And is there anything else you need to do? I don't think so. No, I think if you had a property and it was a month-to-month agreement with the tenants, those tenants are lucky, to be honest, because a month-to-month agreement does not have any security attached to it. I mean, they really, typically with month-to-month, they only need to give 30 days notice. And as soon as the new owners took possession of the house, or at least they put their name, you guys went to settlement and they became the new owners, they immediately became the new landlords. So they could have just said to the tenants, hey, surprise, you've got 30 days to move out because we're honoring your month-to-month lease and we're giving you your 30 days notice. And that would have been it. And that would have been perfectly fine. But the fact is they gave them a 9-month lease, and that's more than they had before. So yeah, that was fine. That's up to them. The 9-month lease really is no concern of yours. It's what they wanted to do. The only thing I would suggest that you make sure that you do with this is when you sell a house that has tenants, you actually have to transfer any prepaid rent or security deposit to the new owners. So you want to make sure that you get that to the new owners, because they need to be able to give that money back to the tenant. That's still the tenant's money, and it belongs to the landlord. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the landlord. And if that landlord is now somebody else, then it should go to them. So make sure you transfer that. It should have been done at settlement if your title company knew about it. But if not, you really do have a responsibility to write the new landlords a check and make sure that the tenants are aware of it and put it all in writing so that it can't come back to haunt you. But congratulations on selling the property. That's exciting. All right, what else? What else do we have?
All right, last question is from Terry. If a tenant pays with a credit card through Cozy, is there a fee and who pays that fee?
Awesome. Yes. So we do allow ACH payments for free. But if a tenant wants to pay for a credit card, there is a 2.75% fee that is just typical, Visa, American Express, MasterCard fees that no one can seem to get around. But yes, there is a fee, and that is paid by the tenant. So again, the landlord doesn't have anything to pay for collecting rent unless they want to collect it super fast. That's just an extra feature we add. But the credit card um, is paid. The fee is paid by the tenant, and in fact, if they do pay by a credit card or a debit card, that transfer gets actually happens in like a day and a half. So that's even faster than ACH. And surprisingly, you'd be amazed at how many tenants will pay rent, like $1,000 rent payment with a credit card, and pay the 2.5% fee, because to them they figured out somehow, they can either earn miles or earn cashback rewards, or they can, maybe it's on a business card, a corporate card or something, that it's okay. The convenience is worth the fee, and that's how it's set up. But again, as a landlord, you'll never have to pay that. Great question, Terry. Okay, I think that's it, right?
That's it.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and Maggie. Thank you so much for your help with this. We will certainly be
Yeah.
doing Q&A again. This was just so much fun, and I think probably more beneficial than some of my other presentations. So again, we're Cozy. Check us out at cozy.co, and again, it's truly free. We are backed by Google and the National Association of Realtors, and have some of the best investors in the industry. We're not going anywhere, and we're taking over the industry, uh, one quality landlord at a time. So that's my cheesy pitch, but yeah, check it out. I'll give you one last chance. As a reminder, check out the handouts in the bottom right hand corner of the bar. There, you'll see um, handouts 205. There's a tenant screening checklist and a webinar tenant screening Q&A PDF. That is the slide deck. So I'll give you like 10 seconds to download that, and then if the recording worked out, you'll see an email tomorrow sometime with the URL to where you could go to watch it. So again, thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Bye.